Okay, so the last speaker of this session is Simon McKenzie, and he will talk about a discrete and bounded and discrete cake calculus.
Right, how does this? Hi. Hello. So I'm Simon, and this is joint work with Harris. And so let me first start with the simplest cake cutting protocol of all. This works with two agents, and it's called divide and choose. So we have our cake, and we have two agents, and we want to allocate the cake in such a way that neither agent believes the other agent has a bigger piece than them. So how can we do this? We can simply ask agent 1 to cut the cake into 2 equal pieces. Agent 2 then decides or indicates which piece he likes best. Let's say it's the leftmost one. We cut the cake in 2, give 2 his preferred piece, and 1 gets the remaining piece, and everyone's happy. So this has been known for quite some time. It's even been referenced as early as in the Bible. But in the 1940s, these three mathematicians sat down and asked themselves, how could we formalize this notion of fairness to beyond 2 people? And they quickly realized that beyond 2 agents, things got quite tricky. And in fact, the specific problem of finding a protocol for 3 agents, and every free protocol for 3 agents, remained open for decades after they formalized the setting. So this was done in the 1960s. These other 2 famous mathematicians, Selfridge and Conway, independently came up with a 3-agent protocol. And this protocol introduced a few simple but very powerful ideas which paved the way to more complicated protocols which came afterwards. After this, the next obvious question was obviously generalizing this to any number of agents. And that remained a major open problem in fair division and more broadly in mathematics for the next few decades. When in 1995, Brams and Taylor published a breakthrough result showing that there existed a protocol for any number of agents. However, their protocol had a major drawback. Although it was guaranteed to terminate, the protocol couldn't be bounded. So I'm going to specifically say what I mean about finite versus bounded in this setting. So with Bram and Taylor's protocol, you can determine the number of cuts that your protocol requires once you've fixed the valuation functions. The valuation functions encode the agent's value of each part of a cake. However, those valuation functions may be arbitrarily complex. And for a bounded protocol, we don't actually care about those valuation functions. All we care about is the number of agents. And once we have the number of agents, we can give a bound on the number of cuts which are required, independent of how complicated the valuation functions are. So more concretely, even for 4 agents, the Brams-Taylor protocol could be made to run arbitrarily long. For any constant, you can find a arbitrarily complex valuation function which requires the protocol to go on beyond that constant number of steps. So even Brams and Taylor were aware that this was a major drawback, and since in the past 20 years, basically it's been the central open problem in the field to be able to bound the query complexity of these protocols independent of evaluation functions, so just as a function of the number of agents. So the 4-agent case was solved recently, and I presented that result at the last stock conference. And now I'm going to talk about the generalization of this to any number of agents. So to give an idea of the concepts which are used in the more general protocol, I'm going to give an alternative 3-agent protocol to the Selfridge-Conway protocol. And although it's more more complicated in Selfridge-Conway, it introduces ideas which just aren't present in Selfridge-Conway and are necessary to generalize to a greater number of agents. So these are the key ideas. The first one is called what we call trimming. And the idea is that if an agent has, if you have a number of pieces of cake and an agent believes that some of the pieces are bigger than another, you can ask that agent to place cuts so that he's equalizing all the pieces. So for example, in the diagram here, you have 3 pieces, and you're asking agent I to make his 2 most preferred pieces equal to his 3rd most preferred piece. So he cuts his two most preferred, which are the leftmost pieces, and we get rid of the grayed out area, and now all the white areas are basically equal from agent I's perspective. Another idea is the idea that we call domination. So throughout the protocol, part of the cake ends up being allocated, and you are left with some residue cake, which is so far unallocated. And we say that an agent I dominates an agent J if, with respect to the partial allocation in the residue, I would be willing to give all the residue to agent J. So what this means is that in the partial allocation, I has accumulated an advantage which is bigger, which he values to be bigger than what's left over. And both these two ideas are present in Selfridge-Conway. But what isn't present in Selfridge-Conway and is like critical to generalizing to a larger number of agents is this idea of permutation, where we keep track of the partial allocations that the protocol has made so far, and we carefully exchange pieces that agents get in a way that doesn't break NV-freeness to make sure that the domination relation between the agents is extended, and we can find a subset of the agents which dominates its complement. And then we can separate the agents and recursively call the protocol on a subset of the agents. So let me just show how this works with free agents, and hopefully it'll give some kind of idea for a more general case. So we have our cake, and we have free agents. And we ask the third agent, which we call the cutter agent, to cut the cake into 3 pieces, which he considers to be equal. And let's focus on the hard case, where agent 1 and 2 fight for the leftmost piece. In that case, this piece is contested, so they can't get it both. So we ask them to trim that piece up to their most preferred uncontested piece, which is their second most preferred piece. So they do that. They place 2 trims. And you can see that agent 1, the blue agent, trims that piece more than the other one. So we separate the piece at the level of the loser or agent, the red agent's trim, and we give agent 1 the piece that he trimmed more because he trimmed it more, so therefore he'd be willing to sacrifice more cake, and so he wins that piece. And what's left over is called beta, is the residue. And then the 2 remaining pieces of cake, agent 2 gets his most preferred, and agent 3 gets whatever's left over. And everyone's happy because agent 3 thought all pieces were equal, and he got a full piece. Agent 1 was willing to trim more than the piece he got anyway, and agent 2 thinks the 2 pieces are equal. Piece 1 and piece 2, the piece that 1 got and piece that 2 got are equal. And we call, so beta is the residue, and alpha is this partial allocation of the cake. So this tells you how to find a partial allocation of a cake. But also, now we can look at the relationship between the agents, and with respect to this partial allocation and this residue beta, we can now see that agent 3 now dominates 1, because from agent 3's perspective, everything that was trimmed came from agent 1's piece of cake. So even if agent 1 were to get back all that's left over, agent 3 would not be envious of agent 1. So you can draw this arrow. And what we want to do is to be able to draw a second arrow from 3 to 2, because in that case, 3 would be willing to give everything to agent 1 and 2, and we can just call divide and choose on 1 and 2, and we're done. The problem is you could repeat the procedure which I just described indefinitely and always end up with the same arrow being drawn because agent 1 always gets the trim piece. So this is where this idea of permutation comes along, where basically the idea is that we're going to switch around the allocation, the pieces that the agents get in the allocations. So you call the protocol this sub-procedure I described once. You get an alpha and a beta, or your partial allocation and your residue. Then you call, so 1, 2, 3 get pieces. Then you call it again on the beta. And then again, you get another partial allocation. And let's say both times the residue came from agent 1's piece. And if you remember, in the procedure, the agent 1's piece was cut from the trim of agent 2. So agent 2 is willing to take agent 1's piece because he considered it to be equal to his own. But agent 1 believes that he got a slight bonus over agent 2. And you can ask agent 1, in which of these allocations did you get the bigger bonus? And agent 1, for example, chooses, let's say he chooses the bottom allocation. Then in that case, agent 1 is happy to switch around his pieces in the top allocation because even though NV-freeness will be broken in that top allocation, it's compensated by the fact that he got a bigger bonus in the bottom allocation. So overall, NV-freeness is preserved. And vice versa, if he chose the top allocation to be his preferred one, you could switch the pieces in the bottom allocation with envy freeness being preserved. And you can see that in both those scenarios, you end up with agent 1 and 2 getting a trim piece. So that means we can now 3 dominates 1, but also dominates 2, and we can get rid of 3. So now I'm going to talk about the n-agent protocol and see how these ideas can be generalized to that to the setting with more agents. So this is the overall structure of what the protocol looks like. So the main protocol just basically calls all these sub-procedures and calls itself recursively once you've found a separation with a subset of the agents dominating its complement. And basically, so the core protocol corresponds to the first part I described, which is a partial generating a partial allocation of the cake that's envy-free to the agents. The discrepancy protocol in the n-agent case, basically, there's an extra complication, which is that we want the agent's valuation functions to not be too different. This is for us to sort of take control of this permutation procedure. But intuitively, you can deal with this because the case where the valuation functions of the agents is very different is actually just an easy case of a problem, because intuitively in fair division, if people value things differently, you actually, it's good for solving the problem. So if this is the case, we call this discrepancy protocol, which just separates the agents. So we can just sort of focus our attention on the hard scenario or the hard sub-problem, which is the one where the valuation functions are very close to each other. And in that case, we call the go-left protocol, which is basically implementing the permutation I described before, but in a more complicated way, whilst making sure envy freeness is still preserved. So in this talk, I won't have time to actually go through discrepancy and go-left, so I'm just going to focus on the core protocol to show you how you can get this partial allocation of a cake, which gives some bounded amount of cake from the perspective of one agent. So let's look at core protocol. So the idea is you feed the protocol a specified cutter, which by convention we just say it's agent n, and a set of agents and some unallocated cake r. Then you ask the cutter to cut the cake into n equal pieces. You call the subcore protocol on those pieces with all the agents except n as input. And then the subcore protocol will return an allocation of those pieces to the agents, where some pieces might be trimmed, but at least one piece is full, and one piece is unallocated and full, basically. So, and then you just give the cutter this unallocated full piece, and then you return the core protocol, and that gives you a partial envy-free allocation of the cake, where the cutter, who believed that all pieces were cut into equal pieces and got a full piece, so the cutter believes he gets at least 1/n of the cake. Like another property of the subcore protocol is it returns 2 full pieces. So basically, from the cutter's perspective, 2/n of the cake is allocated. So it looks like this this diagram. Basically, you can see that there's like 4 pieces which have been generated. The subcore protocol would have been called, and so it returned allocations to 1, 2, and 3, where 2 pieces have been trimmed. 3 got a full piece, and there would have been some leftover piece that can be given to agent 4. So I'm going to, all the hard work is done in the subcore protocol, and I'm going to go through how the subcore protocol sort of returns this partial envy-free allocation. So we call the subcore protocol, we have our 4 pieces, and agent 4 was the cutter, so agent 1, 2, and 3 will put as input. So we order our agents arbitrarily, and we ask agent 1, what piece do you prefer? And he tells us this one. And this piece, so we just give it to him. Then we go to the next agent and ask agent 2, what piece do you prefer? And let's look at the hard case where he prefers the same one. So now this piece is contested. So we ask both agents to place trims based on their most preferred uncontested piece on the contested piece. And let's say agent 2 ends up winning that trim, winning that contest. So agent 2 gets the piece, and agent 1 gets kicked out to his most preferred uncontested piece. Now we go to the next agent, agent 3, and we ask him, what piece do you prefer? And he's still looking at he's not looking at the trim pieces, he's looking at the full pieces. So let's say agent 3 prefers the same piece again. And now we end up in this new situation where you have 2 contested pieces and 2 uncontested pieces. that means we have 3 agents fighting over 2 pieces, and they're guaranteed to get one of the 2 uncontested pieces. So this is just a generalization of a previous problem where you had 1 uncontested piece and 1 contested piece and 3 uncontested pieces. So now we ask the agents to, they're guaranteed to get an uncontested piece, so we ask them to place trims on their contested pieces which are equal to the value of their most preferred uncontested piece. So it looks like that. And if 2 agents, if we had 2 different winners, so the winner is the person who plays the rightmost trim, and so if 2 different agents place the rightmost trim, then in that case we would be done because we could allocate the pieces to 2 different agents, and then the person who gets kicked out from the contested pieces just gets his most preferred uncontested piece, and the cutter just gets what's left over. But you might end up in a scenario where you have an agent placing multiple trims on the rightmost part of a piece, and this is problematic because you can't allocate the both pieces to the agents because that would just be too much cake. So you need to somehow change the benchmark value of that agent who got 2 pieces of cake. So what you do is you take the rightmost trim of a non-winner agent, so someone who didn't win the contest, and you gray out everything to the left of that trim. And now you call the subcore protocol recursively with input the pieces of cake and the grayed out area taken out. And the winner agent as input. So here only agent 2 is the input, and the piece of cake, the cake that was trimmed by agent 1 and 3 is eliminated from this call of subcore protocol. So if you think about how the protocol was working, agent 2 just gets asked what piece you prefer. Let's say he just chooses this one, and that moves his trim to the left of the blue agent's trim because since there were 2 pieces he was winning, but he got to choose his most preferred piece, his value is now greater than the trim of the blue agent who was previously, so in this piece, the blue agent was previously losing to red, but because red got to choose his preferred piece here, his trim sort of hopped on the other side of blue, and now agent blue, or the first agent can take this piece without the red agent being envious of him. And the green agent who loses this contest just ends up being kicked out, so he just gets the middle piece. And then like this is returned to the core protocol, and the cutter agent just gets what's left over. And all agents get a piece which they believe to be better than the other pieces which have been allocated, because at every point in the protocol they got to choose something which they preferred over what was being trimmed. So basically, yeah. So this bound is kind of ridiculous, but like I think it can be like greatly improved. The problem like actually attracted a lot of interest. It was actually featured in Quantum Magazine a few days ago. Yeah, and the obvious open question is to like tighten the bound because you have this huge gap between this tower of 6 ends, and the best lower bound so far is this n squared, which we can't even do exponential yet. And so this is the obvious open problem to make the bound tight. And these are some nice surveys on the topic.